Those that don't have an internal monologue, what is writing like for you? I don't mind the inner monologue, I hate the music always playing in the background. WTF does my brain play music non-stop? I don't ever listen to the radio anymore. Edit, I can't choose what is playing. I've tried to override it, doesn't work. Mine is usually a clip of a song playing repeatedly. It happens day and night, non-stop, and sometimes makes it difficult to get to sleep or get back to sleep if I wake up to use the bathroom or something. It could be a kid's song BC I have a toddler, it could be music I know from my past or even Christmas songs. It's there right along with my regular thoughts, only being in deep concentration makes it stop. Yes, I am ADD, remove the HBC, I'm not hyper. For clarity, there are varying levels of internal monologue, not everyone is dead silent all the time. I can force a voice, it just doesn't show up unless I want it to. I find when I write, sometimes that voice will come out, not always, but I'll sometimes imagine I'm saying my words out loud like a speech. I'm a very fast reader, typer, and writer, so a voice would only slow me down unless I'm being very precise. I simply type, it just happens. Holy fuck, I just learned this is a thing. For me, words, sentences, paragraphs just flow. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I can write some great academia papers on the fly. I don't hear a voice. I can't even force myself to hear a voice. It's just silence and I conceptualize the words. This explains so many things in my life. To make matters more interesting, I actually confuse myself if I try to think something out. I have to write my thoughts as they flow and go from there. I work as a software developer. Trying to think out new projects has always been a challenge. Reading is different for me. I read, I absorb some, read again, absorb more and move on. I don't actively recall what I read until I have a question or problem in front of me that correlates and I can visualize a word or phrase that then satisfies the issue. FML, thanks for this op. In my day-to-day life, my thoughts are about 80% images, 20% monologue. Monologue usually only comes up if I'm thinking about conversations or writing, but even then, not all the time when I write. Sometimes things get started with an internal monologue, and if I get in the groove the words just flow. Like when speaking, I don't plan out every word I say, the thoughts just come out on the fly. I've got 4 novels out and no internal monologue. I've always been fascinated by the rules and norms about how words are used, and I think I just put them together in a way that's pleasing to me. As for crafting a story, I'm a pantser and I don't usually know what's going to happen in advance. Beyond broad strokes, I've never considered it a handicap. I only, relatively, recently learned that most other people have a voice in their head. It's hard to write without losing my thoughts halfway through it. Since I have nothing to hold them with, images, sounds, words, I forget them or scramble them up pretty easily. Had to rewrite this comment a few times, actually. Doesn't happen that often, but it's enough to bother me. This whole thing just caused chaos in my head. I definitely have a voice in my head, but not like some people describe it. I can't talk with a voice, because it's just me thinking. I can't think while I'm talking in my head, because that's my thinking. I am so confused. I'm having an internal dialogue as I read the comments on this thread, and I'm literally saying to myself, how do you not think in words? Do you also not visualize? The emotion thing is even stranger. Then it occurred to me, when I'm happy and excited I feel those emotions, but they rarely come with an internal dialogue. But sad, stressful emotions, yeah, lots of internal dialogue. That my thoughts don't form words by default doesn't mean I can't have thoughts of words. When I need to imagine speech, I do. The difference isn't that a person with an internal monologue thinks in words and a person without an internal monologue lacks that ability, because typically it isn't a form of a fantasia. Rather, we all think in abstract concepts and a person with an internal monologue automatically generates a monologue from it and often isn't aware of thought that isn't internally vocalized. The only time it has felt limiting instead of freeing is when I tried to use dictation software to write prose. I couldn't manage to think of the things I wanted to say and vocalize them at the same time. I don't know if that's the same for people with an internal monologue, if that is because of the way I'm wired, or if that's just because I never exercised them together. If this is a thing, is it then impossible for them to play out a conversation in their head? I often think ahead about important convos, and it is in my head as if it is being spoken out loud. I can monologue those words internally for both parties. Without that, you'd have to say it all out loud. I'm still confused as to what defines this idea of no internal monologue. To me, that could be something as simple as practicing the opening part of my speech internally, so they do not have that ability. My thought process is very much impulse, feelings, and visual ideas. I can, sort of, read in my head, but if I start trying to do very much, I start mumbling out loud to myself. My mind wanders a lot too. I mostly only read audiobooks now, because it's a much better experience. That said, writing is a little difficult. I get ideas and impressions for things that feel cool, but it's very difficult to sort out if it is going to sound cool until I've written it down. Even then, if I do a poor job of articulating what I wanted to say, I might think it's still cool and try to convince others otherwise, and even try to rework the idea several times. It makes describing things much easier for me than most people though. I can focus on a feeling or texture or taste or smell in the dark of my mind and focus on finding words to explain it. Honestly, it's just a snap decision when doing any writing. I don't think about the words before I speak or write, they just come out, and it's just editing from there. If I'm writing a story instead of just a letter, I'll try to picture a scene more like I'm describing a scene in a movie, then adapt as needed. I think everyone experiences very similar things, although there's no way to accurately describe it the same way between people. It's like, I see blue the way I see blue. Perhaps someone else sees blue the way I see green, but we won't know unless we were that person, because blue will have always been blue to them, yet if we were in their mind maybe we would say it's green. A question for somebody without an internal monologue. How do you know if something is appropriate to say or not, such as a joke at work? Like, do you have the voice that says no you shouldn't say that, or do you just have no filter? People without an internal monologue freak me out. My own self-conceptualization is so strongly based around my own internal monologue and thoughts that I don't even consider my body as my true self. My thoughts and inner self is my true self. It scares me that there are people who do not have internal monologues, and in a way I wonder how they can even be human. I mean that in the most non-offensive way possible. I just can't wrap my mind around it, and the concept gives me fits of existential dread. I'm so confused when I read or write. I don't hear my own voice, but it's like the words are pronounced in my head, if that makes sense. Like, if I read, I'm so confused, I hear the pronunciation of the words, but it's also not quite a voice, at least not a clear voice. Anyway, when I write, it just comes out, but sometimes I think about how I want the scene to go before I do. I imagine everything like a movie so that I can picture it in my head. I do the same when reading because it's hard to figure out what's happening if I don't read it, sort of like it's a movie script. I hope this all makes sense. It's hard to explain. I don't have an inner monologue and I have a highly abstract spatial visual way of thinking. I'm also a contractor and most of my work could be called art. Even a simple kitchen remodel will have little touches that nobody would think of. I also am a bit above average in intelligence and I wonder if any of those things correlate. This is me. An idea will spark in my head or there will be a question I want to answer. When I start writing about it, it's almost like I am also reading it for the first time, just like it would be for the reader. What I write is the first thing that pops into my head, and my hands make it a reality. I think it helps for connecting thoughts. I also speak this way so it can lead to uncomfortable situations, but also hilarity and good ideas. With writing, the editing process becomes paramount. I'll also make up lyrics to popular songs with whatever I happen to be doing at the moment. I assume everyone can do this, you just need to exercise it. I don't think it's necessarily any different than others, although of course I don't really know how anyone else does it. I don't have an internal monologue but I can think of what to write if needed. Like today I wrote some work emails and started them off with just describing the issue I had, then read through it to evaluate whether it was clear enough. When I write fiction, a scene exists as thoughts in my head, then I need to translate them into words. So I write and read a lot and don't have an internal monologue, unless I'm really trying to focus on writing a piece of dialogue and hearing it in the character voice. It's like quick translation, there's thoughts, feelings and images in my head, sometimes entire sentences, but I never hear my own voice and thoughts. So, I see a picture, there's a ship, there's ice, it looks like jewels on the ground. I imagine things they'd be feeling, bones aching from the cold, face muscles tired from squinting against the glare, and I just write it down. I don't have an internal voice when I read either. Found it an amazing concept when I found out lots of people do. Doesn't it get noisy? Opposite kinda here. Mad ADHD. I have such a fast and diverse internal monologue that it makes writing very challenging to get each idea out before I am already choosing between the next 3 or 4 plot twists or turns or what have you. With rhyming and poetry it's even more of a difficulty to calm down and have patience because I will be inside of a very technical scheme and then be thinking of a way to tie in a previous bar with the next bar, before I am already thinking about stuff that rhymes with all the previous syllables. This is like a bunch of me all telling me do this, say this at once, I used to not have an internal monologue, but I got myself to develop one to get better at writing. As a result my vocabulary is very precise, though accuracy changes with the crowd. I did this when I was in middle school, and my teacher was teaching something about writing stories. Memory is a bit fuzzy of that time, but the gist of it is that I didn't understand something the teacher, said, and when I asked a question her response was to use the voice in your head. I was like, damn, I haven't been doing that, and tried really hard from then on to use my head voice. At first it was weird and slow, but I got better at it over time and I stopped jumbling my words and stuttered less. Now I use it to arrange words when it comes to language, but for anything else I still think in ideas and concepts as opposed to words, and don't use an inner monologue until I need to explain it to someone else. I hate my internal monologue. When I am typing or writing, my brain will combine what I am typing with my internal monologue saying what needs to be typed next, and suddenly I am skipping letters or words. I've always figured I had an internal monologue, but after reading this thread I'm realizing I don't. When I'm writing it's like I'm speaking. The words just come out. The thoughts are there, but they're not vocalized physically or mentally. I can consciously form a thought in my mind, what I previously thought to be internal monologue, but it doesn't have a voice and isn't there unless I consciously will it to be. I walked home from school from grades 1-12, So for an hour or so every school day I had time to myself, which I used to explore, role play, and talk to myself. My internal monologue is actually very external, and this is blowing my mind. Holy God, this thread is making so many things fall in place for me. I only now started to realize how much this internal monologue regulates, or sometimes amplifies my emotions, especially the negative ones, the unexplained rage, because sometimes it's really my internal monologue that can't put to words things that I do inherently understand, or sometimes how I can't let go of something because my internal monologue won't fucking shut up about it. No internal monologue, I just write. For university research papers I would read the reference material a few times, over a period of time. It would perk and then I would sit down, it would just flow. Ideas would be mostly formed, some would become clearer as I wrote. I usually do a lot of cut and pasting as ideas sometimes get jumbled together or out of order. Papers were always coherent, well received, and got high marks. I don't think I'm alone in saying that this is a very confusing question. We are assuming that some people do not have an internal monologue. What exactly is meant by have an internal monologue? I always assumed that everybody had one, just to varying degrees in regard to each individual and time. I would agree though, that my conscious inner monologue is most active when writing, but could we be talking about an unconscious inner monologue? I don't even know if I have that, but I have a very active conscious one, I suppose even semi-conscious in some experiences. Would a truly unconscious inner monologue just equate to a naturally creative person? Does anybody here claim to not have an internal monologue in any capacity? Maybe even just to debate varying levels of conscious versus unconscious communicative thinking. I would be quite interested. TBH. I don't think I have an internal monologue. I can't picture what one would be. A literal voice in your head that speaks when you think. For me, if I'm thinking specifically in words, like when writing, then the word has a sound in my head and it just comes out. I'm a blatterer when it comes to writing, and when I speak there seems to be no filter, but I can't organize my thoughts beforehand without having written it down. Got to the point in life where I just was crap at organizing, till I figured out I had to speak aloud to myself or write myself a list to get what I specifically meant in order to process my thoughts with clarity. Writing is the same as reading for me. The words have a sound in my head that comes out as I start the word, but there's no planning, or if I'm thinking in general, it's not in words, it's in feelings and connections. Is this a lack of internal monologue? Most of my thoughts are images or animations, but when I am writing I am imagining text. Text has no sound but has a meaning, just like you see a picture of a dog and you just know it's a dog. Well, explaining thinking is pretty complicated because it's so wild and too visual and abstract, and I can't find words for that. Writing is pretty easy to me, as text is visual, so my brain kinda converts from mind image to real image, which is easy, but talking is worse because my thoughts are pretty silent. I can imagine someone speaking or imagine a sound of car and horn or whatever, but I don't have any constant talking in my mind. This doesn't matter BTW, that thoughts can't be heavy and exhausting. When I type, I do it pretty quickly and I barely think about it. I can speak 5 languages almost fluently. Look at this comment, this level fluently. English is not my native tongue. By text, but while it comes to talking I speak just 3 on a level when I can communicate easily. It takes me a lot of time to learn how the text should sound like, and as I am learning, I learn more and more words, but I am unable to think fast enough to speak. But then it kinda clicks for me and poof, suddenly I speak foreign language on a good level. If you have one, you just don't. To explain, the inner voice is the same as when you speak, but without using your vocal cords. only in your head, and it's automatic, no choice. When I read, I hear my inner voice reading for me, same when I write, and when I think I can hear myself thinking.